When am I going to play the video?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Prakriti. I'll come in the room and tell you.
I'm sorry, we are already live on YouTube, so let's be mute.
He has been a resident of Govardhan Eco Village, a multi-award winning eco community for almost a decade, serving in various capacities. He is known by his students for his ability to convey complex philosophical topics in a simple to understand way, using humor and metaphors. His areas of expertise include Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, mind and meditation, and Yoga Nidra. He is also a faculty in the Bhaktivedanta Vidyapeetham, a traditional Vedic school at GEV, teaching Srimad Bhagavatam and other Bhakti scriptures. He is also active in the field of environmental sustainability, speaking in various national and international forums. Now, we hear from him, Nimai Lila Das.
Hare Krishna, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Very grateful to the Pavitra Connect Forum for inviting me for this very wonderful series of talks that they have started. I was told that they are going to cover very systematic overview of the entire Bhagavad Puran, and I was today requested to speak on giving an introduction, setting a tone for this wonderful journey into this ancient Purana that we are going to embark upon. Some of you might have heard about this particular Purana, Bhagavad Purana, or Srimad Bhagavatam as it is also popularly known as. Some of you might be hearing this name for the first time, right? So among the entire gamut of Vedic literatures, the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Purana is one of the most popularly read scriptures, perhaps paralleled only by the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The third most popular scripture that you will see is the Bhagavad Purana. So just to give you a comparison of how prominent it has been across the generations, scholars explain that there have been almost up to 80 different commentaries on the Bhagavad Puran. And in comparison to the next highest number of commentaries for any other Purana are just 2 in number. So where is 80 and where is 2? That itself shows how popular this Purana is. So today we are going to start this very wonderful journey where we are going to understand the significance of this Purana. So before we start, I would like to recite some prayers. So I'm going to project on the screen what prayers we are going to recite. And if you like, you can join your palms and follow the prayers. Closing your eyes. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिन्निति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। So again, another warm welcome to each and every one of you for joining us in this very special session, a journey into the Bhagavad Purana. So my objective, as I was saying earlier, behind today's class, today's discussion, is that it's some of you who have never heard about what this Bhagavad Purana is, or some of you might have heard something about it. So today we're going to understand the background behind this Purana and understand mainly from three perspectives. From a historical perspective, what exactly is the Bhagavad Purana? From a philosophical perspective, what exactly does Bhagavatam actually talk about? Because we know, we usually think of the entire Vedas as one big black box, but what is a special, unique contribution of Bhagavatam to the theology of the Vedic traditions? And finally, and most importantly, the spiritual significance of the Bhagavatam. So we're going to talk about this from these three different perspectives. So to begin with, let us first understand the historical perspective. Now, when we talk about, usually when you use the word like Vedas, right, we usually think of them to be like some random collection of books, right? It's just one big encyclopedia, which is perhaps just talking about some rules and regulations and some tenets, right? But it's not really so. In fact, the Vedas are a vast body of knowledge. Mainly when we refer to as the Vedas, we are talking about the four primary Vedas: the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Atharva Veda. The Rig Veda mainly is a very philosophical treatise. Then the Yajur Veda talks about a lot of practices, the rituals that are involved in the Vedic tradition are mentioned in there. Then the Samaveda is a collection of beautiful prayers in the most choicest of tunes or meters, chandas. These are all prayers that you will usually see in the Vedic tradition. And all the other miscellaneous information, like for example, the Vastu Shastra, some of you might have heard about this, right? Or the Dhanur Vidya, Ayurveda, right? These are all the miscellaneous sciences which have come, which are put in the category of the Atharva Veda. So broadly speaking, this is how the four Vedas are classified. But there are more books or more categories of literature that come under the category of this Vedas. What exactly are these? Then the next important one are the Upanishads. While the Vedas present varieties of spiritual concepts, the Upanishads are further deliberations on these concepts, usually in the form of a discussion between a spiritual master and a disciple, or maybe a father and a son, or maybe two advanced souls debating with each other, trying to arrive at a conclusive truth, right? So these Upanishads, the word Upanishad literally means to sit near and discuss something, right? So these are very close discussions which should happen, and the compilations of these discussions are what are compiled as this, Upanishads, right? Then comes what are the Puranas. While the Upanishads are highly philosophical, the Puranas, on the contrary, while still presenting that same philosophical essence, they take the line of stories and storytelling. And more specifically, what kind of stories? These are not fictitious stories, but rather the Puranas take key historical events and weave them together to present a particular philosophical thought. Right? Now, the moment you hear that, you may think, oh, then are Puranas like historical record, like histories as we study in the modern sense? No, the histories are different. Those are the next category, the Itihasas, which you see on the screen here. The Itihasas are straight chronological narrations of historical events. But what makes the Puranas so special is that while the Puranas are also talking about historical events, they don't necessarily maintain a chronological integrity. They don't necessarily maintain a chronology of events, but rather they maintain a philosophical continuity. So you will see many times, many stories, sometimes you will see slightly altered version of that story in the Puranas, or sometimes you will see stories happening across different frames of time, narrated one after another. So chronology is not the main criteria in the Puranas. And many people who fail to understand this important concept, they misunderstand the Puranas, thinking, oh, these are just some random fictitious stories. No, these are not random fictitious stories, but rather stories, historical accounts, very carefully arranged so that the reader understands an important philosophical concept. That is a specialty of the Puranas. And among the literatures, there are 18 main Puranas, and these Puranas are also further classified into the three categories, according to three gunas: Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. If you are new to these terms, don't worry about that. But among these 18 Puranas, the Bhagavat Purana, which we are embarking upon starting from today, the Bhagavad Purana is considered as a crest jewel, the most important Purana. In fact, one very great scholarly Acharya, a spiritual preceptor, he presents that the Puranas, if imagine all the four Vedas and the Upanishads, they are like individual gems, right? And you make a nice necklace out of those gems. But this necklace is an open necklace. For this necklace to be complete, to achieve a purnata or completeness, then you take a very special pendant and you put it in the end and join the two loose ends of the necklace. So the Puranas are given that significance. They are like the pendant that give the completeness to the necklace. So they give the purnata to the entire understanding of the Vedas. So therefore, the Puranas are also given the same level of importance as the four primary Vedas and the highly philosophical Upanishads. Then we said what the Itihasas are, historical records, and there are Samhitas. Usually these are collection of smaller prayers, like usually they are realizations of one particular person, like the Brahma Samhita, for example. Some of you might have heard this. These are realizations of the sage Brahma, right? Then there are many other Samhitas that are representing an individual realizations of an individual seeker, a practitioner, or a realized soul. right? And then, of course, there is the Mahabharata. Now, some of you who've been following what I said in the last 5 minutes carefully, you may think Mahabharata is also a historical record. Isn't it a itihasa? Like a popular itihasa is Ramayana. Then why isn't Mahabharata one of the itihasas? That's where the genius of the person that you see in the picture here, Srila Veda Vyasa or the Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa, his genius comes in. That the four Vedas, they were all, prior to Vyasa's intervention, they were never in a written format, but rather they were learned in a tradition of oral reception, which means that the guru or the teacher would narrate the Vedas, all the different literatures as part of the Vedas. They would literally narrate, and the student would hear and memorize, and they would pass it on to the next generation through memory. Right? Can you imagine? Today we can't even remember our own best friend's phone number sometimes. And here are these enlightened people of the past who are able to memorize volumes of books. Not only have they memorized it, but they're able to pass it on to the next generation also. So realizing that this system of learning is not sustainable in the present age and time, Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa, he put together all the Vedas. He kind of hit all the classification that I told you as Rig, Yajur, Sama, Atharva. He actually put it all together in a written format. And because he did such a stupendous work in putting the Vedas together, giving a structure to the Vedas, he's given the title as Veda Vyasa, as the master of the Vedas, right? So Vyasa literally means a compiler, and Veda Vyasa, the compiler of the Vedas. That's a title that he was given, right? Otherwise, his actual name was Krishna Dvaipayana. So when Veda Vyasa did this, right, realizing the complexity of all the Vedic literatures, he wanted to present an easy to understand literature, which is presenting the essence of the Rig, Yajur, Sama, Atharva, some of the philosophical concepts, so that the general masses can easily understand that. With that intention, he wrote the Mahabharata. So interweaving along the story of the Mahabharata, he included a lot of philosophical concepts, especially about concept on dharma, the concept of truth is what he very nicely presents in the Mahabharata. But having presented all of this wonderful, stupendous literatures, it is described that our great scholar Vedavyasa, he was still very dissatisfied. He was very despondent because he felt something lacking. He felt there was some, he has not done right justice to the topic under consideration, the Vedas. He felt that he has not presented the complete understanding of the Vedas. In fact, he even wrote a thesis study of the entire Vedic literature in a very simple sutra format. Sutras are these simple one-line aphorisms, right? He compiled all of that and he called it as a Vedanta Sutra. And we're going to talk about that in the later part of our presentation today. Despite writing all this wonderful literature, he was still not satisfied. And in that moment of great darkness, in the moment of the great despair in his life, he was approached by his spiritual master, the great divine sage Narada. And when he inquired from Narada, Narada tells him that, "Oh, great Vyasa, you have done indeed a great commendable work, but somewhere you have not presented the crux. The key essence has not been sufficiently highlighted." Right? So you have written all these literatures very good. You have classified them very good. The Mahabharata you wrote very nice, but somewhere in trying to present your mastery of literature, somewhere you have diluted the key essence. So the reason why you are feeling dissatisfied despite such great literary accomplishment is that you have not sufficiently highlighted the crux of the Vedic understanding. What is that one key concept? What is that one important practice? What is that one ultimate goal, so to speak, that is going to benefit everyone? That you have not sufficiently highlighted. It is there, but only an extremely diligent reader will be able to find out after repeated readings. So this is what you need to do. So then, after having realized that, following the instructions of his spiritual master Narada, Vyasa revisits one of the Puranas, the Bhagavad Purana, which had already compiled. He revisits that Purana and edits that Purana and presents it in what we know today as this Bhagavad Puran. Today we have access to 18,000, a little over 18,000 verses of this Purana spread across a little over 300 chapters, right? And this one Purana is, you could say, is the magnum opus of the great Veda Vyasa, the great Krishna Dvaipayana who has mastered the essence of the Vedas. He has now presented that key essence in one book, the Bhagavad Purana. So now you know why I said earlier on that this is the most popular Purana, right? Now historians have presented slightly mixed views about the origin of the Vedas and the Puranas. If you refer to a very traditional Vedic practitioner, they would say that the Vedas in itself have no origin. In fact, there's a very interesting Sanskritam term for it. It is called as apaurushaya. Paurushaya sounds like the word Purusha. Purusha, a person, right? A human. So apaurushaya means a non-human source. So which means the Vedas, a traditionalist would say that the Vedas have no point of beginning as such, right? So they would say that all these four Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, they are all there eternally. They are just given by a divine source. You can't put a date to it. There is no origin point. They have eternally existed. That is the narrative that you would hear many times from a very traditional Vedic practitioner. And on the other side, you also have many modern historians, academicians. They like to who are very interested in the chronology of historical events. They like to put dates to the Vedic literatures. Perhaps you will hear dates like the Rig Veda being the oldest among them. They claim something like around 5000 BC is when the Rig Veda was spoken of, right? And the Bhagavad Purana is said to be at least around 1000 years old, about 10 centuries, some say even about 15 centuries old, right? Now, how do you reconcile this? How do I see that on one side I'm noticing somebody calling it as it is an eternal literature, and on the other side somebody saying no, there is a point of beginning only about 1500 years ago, right? How do I reconcile this? So to understand that, we need to understand the very meaning of the word Veda. Veda literally means knowledge. And where did this knowledge come from? It is said that in the beginning of creation, along with the matter which expanded as in the process of creation, there was also meaning or knowledge. And this meaning or knowledge, it permeates through the space in the form of a divine cosmic sound, right? When I say cosmic sound, it is not some sound that you can hear like what you are hearing right now, for example, when I'm speaking. The Vedas themselves explain that the sound that we usually refer to has 4 components, right? The more popular component of sound is the first, the Vaikari, or the physical sound. You know, like when I clap, you heard a sound, right? It's just a sound for you, right? That is the physical aspect of sound. A sound which just is produced by contact of any 2 physical objects, and it just hits the eardrums and just produces a signal. That is what is Vaikari sound. But think about it. At this point, let us say your phone rings and you hear the voice of your best friend, somebody whom you haven't heard from in a really long time. You just heard them say hi, right? Which is like just 1 syllables, or you know, hi. That is all that you heard. But that 1 syllable produces some kind of a change in your heart, change in your mind, change in your mental space. Perhaps you are drawn back into a different time zone when you both, you know, it's your best friend. Perhaps when you interacted a lot with this person, perhaps brings you a lot of memories, perhaps brings a lot of emotional change in you, right? Now, this clap is also a sound, the hi is also a sound, but there's a difference. That hi didn't just come by vibrating some vocal cords, but that hi came from a seat of emotions from the other person. Therefore, that sound penetrated past your eardrum and affected you in your mind, in your heart. So the seat of this Madhyama sound is coming from the mind, from the emotions. Then if you go even more deeper than the mind is intelligence, like ideas. What is an idea? Idea is also a sound. You are not hearing it, you are not producing the sound physically, verbally, but there is a conversation happening inside your head. There is a sound which is produced inside your head. And not only that, when you hear an idea being communicated, or maybe some kind of an intellectual concept, perhaps in a class, maybe if you remember, recall your university days or school days, when you heard your professor speak, explaining a particular scientific concept, it was not just words, though those words were entering into your inner space, creating some kind of understanding and realization. You're like, oh yes, aha, yes, this is it, right? You are getting deeper understanding. What is that happening? There is an intellectual understanding which you are gaining. That is a different level of sound. This intellectual understanding is not ordinary. This is where all the ideas stem from. This is the impetus for all action, right? Every action that you do is coming, whether a sound you're speaking, whether you are moving your hands, whether you're walking, running, or accomplishing some task. It is all a result of this idea, that Pashyanti sound, that intellect. Pashyanti means, something that reveals. Many times in animated comic books or something, you see the idea bulb, the thought bulb. That Pashyanti is like, it illuminates like light, and yeah, you have that tada moment, aha moment, right? And beyond that is the 4th level of sound called as para sound. It is the spiritual sound which penetrates past the physical, mental, and intellectual layers and affects us at the spiritual layer, and it gives us spiritual understanding and spiritual meaning, right? Even your ideas are a processing of a certain meaning that you have gathered, that you believe in deep down somewhere. Because ideas also come somewhere from your worldview, right? So this para sound, the spiritual sound, affects you at that level of your being. That para sound, that is the cosmic sound I was referring to. So the very meaning is what is this cosmic sound, and that very meaning is what we are calling as the Vedas. So how do I then reconcile the traditionalist view and the historian's view? Is that very meaning was there right from the beginning of creation. And over a period of time, these enlightened masters, like for example, the great sage Vedavyasa himself, they were able to access this cosmic sound in their states of meditation, in their states of samadhi, in their states of dhyana, deep trance. And that meaning got revealed within their heart, and they presented that meaning through words. They presented that meaning in the form of a written literature, right? Understand this. Meaning and words are not the same. Words are a means that you use to communicate a certain meaning. The meaning space is it's much more subtler than the word, the physical space. Words very much happen in the physical space, right? Words, letters, writing, sound, the physical sound that you're hearing, these are all in the physical space, but they are an external manifestation. They are a mere form to the substance called as meaning. And that meaning is the Veda, which has eternally existed. And even today, it's not just these enlightened masters of the past, but even today, sincere seekers can access this realization, this cosmic sound, through sincere practice of these spiritual methods and techniques, right? The practice part, of course, is beyond the scope of our discussion today. But the understanding we need to get is that this Bhagavat Purana, the Vedas, and more especially the Bhagavat Purana this journey we are embarking upon, please do not think it is just some random stories or fictitious stories, but rather this is presenting that very meaning which is as old as this very creation itself and beyond, right? So what kind of a very special journey that we are embarking upon, right? So that is the historical significance that I wanted to present. Next, we would like to talk about the philosophical side of the Bhagavad Puran. What exactly is the Bhagavatam presenting? If you remember, I mentioned this word called as the Vedanta Sutra, where Srila Vedavyasa, after having compiled the entire Vedic gamut of Vedic literatures, he presented his thesis on it, like a summary on it, and called it as a Vedanta Sutra. And he begins that sutra by urging every intelligent human being to start inquiring about the absolute truth. Athato Brahma Jigyasa. Right? And after having explained what exactly is that absolute truth, what do you mean by that absolute truth, he defines this absolute truth by saying Janmasya yataha, right? Janmadi yasya yataha. So what is that? Janma adi. Janma means birth, adi, etc. So origin and etc. Meaning origin, maintenance, destruction, the entire cycle. Janmadi, yes, asya, of that, of this which is there here, yataha, that. So just to give a translation to that which is the cause of origin, etc., origin, maintenance, destruction of this. So this here is referring to this material world, this physical reality that we are experiencing. What is the cause of that? This is where philosophical inquiry begins, right? It begins by asking the question, what is the origin of things, and more specifically, why do things exist, right? While our modern understanding, the scientific understanding, answers the question, how do things happen, right? We have a fairly good understanding today about many physical phenomena, like how does the sun rise? We know it. How do seasons take place? We know it, right? But can you answer the question, why does the sun rise? Why do seasons undergo change, right? When the how questions turn to why questions, that is where philosophical inquiry begins. And the Bhagavad Purana also begins by addressing this question. Right in the first verse, it begins by addressing. So you see, it is not just stories alone, but rather it's very deep philosophy that the Bhagavad Purana is presenting, right? In fact, it is going to take us, is going to question our whole experience of reality by presenting very important topics to us through throughout the entire Purana, the Bhagavad Purana. Because the Vedas in themselves, they question our experience of reality, right? Because most of us, we assume that this is what is real, what is happening around me is real. There's a very popular question in modern philosophy. If any of you are in, perhaps you might have heard about this if you are philosophy enthusiasts. The picture that you are seeing on the screen here, it's called as brain in a vat or a jar, a brain in a jar, right? So philosophers ask this question, finally, what exactly is a brain? Brain is a processing organ of the body, which is getting inputs from the eyes, the nose, the skin, all the sensory organs, right? That is how I'm processing. When you're looking at the screen right now, there is light reflecting off the screen, and that image of that screen is being reflected on the retina of the eye, and that is being converted into some electric signal, and that electric signal is going to the brain, right? And that is how you're perceiving reality around you, whether it be a smell or a touch or a sound. That's reality for you. At the end of the day, reality is just a bunch of electric signals going to your brain, speaking from a biological point of view. So modern philosophers ask this question: what if I remove the brain out of the body, put it in some kind of a jar where it can still survive, and let us say I figured out which wire goes to where, like where is the optical nerve connecting to the brain, where is the acoustic nerve connecting to the brain, and to those exact spots, let me connect some wires and give the exact right voltage signal, right? So I'm artificially recreating those signals, right? I know some of you at this point may be remembering the movie Matrix, which was a big hit a decade or so ago, right? Something like this happens in that movie also. And not only that, there are many science fiction movies have taken this as a theme. So they ask this question: how do I know whether am I physically here, or is it that I'm somewhere in some lab where my brain is inside a jar of some fluid being given some electric signals, right? What is reality? So this is from a modern philosophical perspective. The Vedantic perspective takes it even more deeper, because the idea of what is consciousness is still not understood completely in the modern sense. But they talk about something even beyond just the brain, but they talk about the soul as a seat of consciousness, right? Am I really perceiving reality? Is this a physical? Is this not? Is this real or not? Right? Because the reality that I'm experiencing is very much a subjective reality. Each and every one of us, we are perceiving the reality through our limited senses, our limited understanding, right? A same scenario may be a happy scenario for me, and perhaps a sad scenario for you, and a totally neutral scenario for somebody else, right? So what is reality? So the Vedantists explain that each and every one of us, we are going to the subjective reality. We need to learn to harmonize ourselves with the objective reality, the absolute reality. That absolute reality is what they are referring to as the absolute truth, or the Param Satyam. So understanding this objective reality, or Param Satyam, or presenting what or who this Param Satyam is the main goal of the Bhagavad Purana. So to do that, we have to rise above our limited subjective understanding of this physical world and broaden our scope of understanding, right? Because objective reality is much more, what could be the best word for it? Much more magical, mystical, extraordinary than the present reality that we are perceiving, right? And that is where the Bhagavatam, if you are a first time reader of Bhagavatam, sometimes you will go crazy like, oh my God, what is all this? Is it, I mean, this is even science fiction will not come close to some of the things that you will read in Bhagavatam, right? How do I perceive these things? Because for example, you can see what are these objective realities that the Bhagavatam is presenting. It is presenting this entire objective reality by presenting 10 key topics, 10 main topics of Bhagavatam. What are those 10 topics? It talks about Sarga. In the first canto of Bhagavatam is very much like an introduction. It is, like this entire Bhagavad Puran itself, like I said, it has 18,000 verses. It is further classified into 12 sections, 12 volumes, 12 books. They are referred to as cantos or skandas in Sanskritam. So what exactly are these 12 cantos presenting? The first canto is presenting more like an introduction. So after having presented that introduction, the second canto presents the entire manifestation of this creation, right? The primary creation, Sarga as it is called. What is the seed behind all this cosmic reality? And it talks about this beautiful description of how Lord Brahma, this cosmic creator, right? How he finds himself born on this lotus which is connected to the navel of Lord Mahavishnu, right? Now many of you who are hearing these terms for the first time may be wondering, what is this? Is lotus and navel and what is going on here, right? Or maybe some of you who have heard this, just because you have sufficiently heard this a lot, maybe you might have accepted this, okay, yeah, this is how it is, right? But you have to understand that Bhagavatam is talking about different dimensions simultaneously. That is one of the challenges that a new reader of Bhagavatam faces. Because Bhagavatam, the space-time understanding of Bhagavatam is not like what we understand here. Because Bhagavatam sometimes from human time, it jumps into cosmic time. From human dimension, it jumps into, from a human physical dimension, it jumps into a metaphysical dimension. So all these things are happening parallelly, right? And the beauty is, the metaphysical realities are also personal. They are not just random energies in space, but they are also personal, right? One of the, I'll give you a very simple example to understand this concept, right? Now, just imagine, some of you might have heard this concept of brain waves, ECGs and stuff like that, right? Now imagine you are engaging in a conversation with your friend, right? And a doctor has connected all these sensors all across your head, your brain, and they're taking a reading of your brain waves. As you are speaking, the entire narration, maybe you are narrating a whole story of your childhood, right? As you're narrating the story of your childhood, your brain is creating a certain pattern, and they are collecting that entire data in the form of these different spikes and waves that they see on the graph. Now, at the end of the entire conversation, the doctor, the expert there, they will tell you, look, here is a story. Now, when you look at that story, all you're seeing is some lines and waves and graphs and patterns. But you're like, no, this is not the story. The story is different. I understand story as words and, people and, all the narrations which I spoke of. How can you call this a story? Now, look at it objectively. Aren't these two the same? When your story is presented in the physical reality in the form of words, they manifest in a way that you and I normally understand as normal stories, as conversations. But when the same story is seen at a brain level, at an intellectual level, it is interpreted in the form of those random graphs. Random to us because we don't know how to interpret those stories looking at the graphs, but an expert can look at that graph and say, okay, this is the part where some sadness in the story began. Oh, this is the part where some happiness came. oh, this is the part, where some fear came. They can understand that, because you and I are not trained to look at that reality and understand. We may find it fictitious. So likewise, when you are reading these different pastimes and episodes, these extraordinary descriptions that are sometimes mentioned in the Puranas, do not undermine them as just some random fictitious stories or just some moral stories, symbolic stories, or even worst case calling them as mythological stories that has become popular in many modern narratives. These are not mythology, these are not random stories, these are not fictitious stories, these are not even metaphorical stories or symbolic stories, but rather they are just happening at a different level, a different level of reality, at a different dimension, which you and I are not able to perceive at our level, or which most people cannot perceive at our level. So that creation at that level is what the Sarga, the primary creation, talks about. Then after having the primary and the secondary creation, both are quite complicated in that sense. They talk about many archetypes being created and how these archetypes become the template for the varieties of species that you see all around you, right? So the first, as I said, the first canto presents an introduction. The second canto talks about this primary creation, Sarga. The third and the fourth cantos talk about the secondary creation, the Visarga, how the different varieties of species, very beautiful description of all the botany and zoology perhaps you know of is presented in that section, right? Along, again, I'll come to that. It's not just philosophy and story part, but there's also interlaced with nice stories, and I'll explain that reason why later on. Then after that, the fifth canto, it talks about how the physical planes are arranged, how the physical dimensions and also these archetype dimensions that I spoke about, the subtle dimensions that I spoke about earlier. How are those spaces also arranged in the entirety of this material universe? The entire Vedic cosmology is explained, right? Then how does the Lord provide protection to his sincere devotees? The portionam that is described in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, again through wonderful stories of Ajamila, right? And then there is the 7th canto. It talks about what are the varieties of impetus that come in human beings, how human inclinations can be categorized into different psychophysical orders of life. They are very nicely presented. More in terms of the social orders are presented in the Uti, the 7th canto. Then, like I said, time itself is a cyclical concept. It's a totally different concept from modern understanding. Modern understanding is a linear understanding of time, whereas the Bhagavatam presents a cyclical understanding. And throughout these cycles, there are different events, historical events that have taken place. They are called manvantaras. So stories about those are presented. And in the 8th canto, then 8th and 9th also then talks about how Ishanukatha, how the Lord has appeared in his various avatars or incarnations, and what are the different activities that he has performed. The signs of God is very nicely described. That's another topic that you will see predominantly in these. So though these topics are spread all across the Bhagavatam, they are predominantly classified like that as per these cantos, right? Then comes the 10th canto, which specifically talks about the Ashraya. The 10th canto exclusively talks about the main protagonist of the entire Bhagavad Puran, the key hero of the entire Bhagavad Puran, who's Lord Krishna. So a beautiful narration about the stories about Lord Krishna are described. Then in the 11th canto, it talks about liberation. Now that I have understood a lot of these concepts, how do I personally apply these concepts and align my subjective reality with the objective reality, so that I get out of this limited perception around me? That is a state of liberation. Liberation does not mean just disappearing or just wandering into nothingness or into everythingness, but rather mukti or liberation means reawakening of your consciousness and realizing your your true identity, when you align your subjective and objective realities. And finally, how the destruction, the dissolution takes place, Nirodha, right? So that is also spoken of in the 12th canto. So you see how systematically, if you look at these topics, what does this remind you of? Doesn't it sound like a school curriculum? Right? Even in school, we study about science, physical sciences. So primary creation, secondary creation. We talk about social studies, how society functions. Puti, what I spoke about, social impetus, right? Civic science, social science, how structures for protection of law and order in the society are maintained, the protection aspect, right? Moral sciences is what we study. Art is explained, right? So you see all of these topics, like in a school curriculum, we learn this different subjects to achieve a certain end goal, some kind of a holistic development. Likewise, these 10 various topics that the Bhagavad Puran presents are the curriculum for us to awaken our consciousness. That is the end goal. That is the the highest goal, so to speak, where we are able to get out of this the limited perception that we have and achieve a higher state of consciousness. So these 10 topics are like the curriculum that the Bhagavad Puran actually presents. Right? Okay, that's about the philosophical, yeah. And then finally, okay, there's just one more. I already spoke about the Vedanta Sutra earlier. I said that how Vyasa has compiled this Vedanta Sutra. So he also presented this Bhagavad Puran. As I said, this was his magnum opus work. He presents this Bhagavad Puran as a natural commentary, meaning that all the sutras are sometimes very complicated, to understand. So he gives a very detailed explanation of the summary of the Vedas in the form of this Bhagavad Puran. So therefore, you see, simply by reading this one Purana, you will understand the essence of all the Vedic literatures. And how does it do that? This is the point which I was mentioning about earlier. It is not a very didactic style of presentation. It's not that, okay, point A, point B, point C, okay, understood? That is not how the Upanishads talk like that sometimes. In fact, many times, most of the times. Most of the Upanishads are like that. But the Bhagavad Puran, the speciality is, it does not just give a very didactic style of presentation, but gives a very experiential kind of a storytelling based way to understand, because stories are the way in which the human brain is designed to absorb information. So by presenting these wonderful historical stories and interlacing them with the right philosophical concepts, it becomes so easy for any reader or any hearer of the Bhagavad Purana that they can understand these complicated philosophical topics so easy. That is a speciality, the beauty. So therefore, it is a wonderful compilation of sacred stories that you will hear across histories. But while you're listening to these stories, while you're enjoying these stories, some very powerful key philosophical concepts also get internalized, right? Through, that is the power of this cosmic sound. It just naturally gets internalized and it's dawned upon you. That is the beauty of this Bhagavad Puran. And more so, how exactly are these philosophical concepts explained? Right? Varnayantiti Mahatmanas Shrutena Anjanena Sa. That these Mahatmas are Varnayat, they are describing these philosophical concepts by wonderful reformative prayers. So another consistent theme that you will see throughout the Bhagavatam is, along with the stories, you will see wonderful prayers of various prayers by different personalities, exalted devotees, who are presenting these philosophical concepts through those prayers. So into this one book, you see, through storytelling and through reformative prayers, you will be able to capture the philosophical essence. And what does it do? Right? I will very quickly summarize in one last slide. Right? So what exactly, what is the spiritual effect that we were talking about? It creates a soul transformation, right? Because what does the Bhagavad Puran ultimately do? As I said earlier, it is the summary of the entire Vedas. The Vedas mainly talk about the karma, the path of disciplined action, jnana, the path of intellectual endeavor, or the path of dhyana or yoga, right? The path of meditative absorption. So these are the three popular paths that the Vedas talk about. But then there is a fourth hidden path, which is the way which integrates, which combines all these three paths. And in a sense, not only does it combine, but it also synergizes. It energizes and synergizes the activities of these three paths. And that path is called the path of bhakti. Bhakti means unalloyed devotion. And this bhakti is the key theme of the entire Bhagavad Purana. In fact, Bhagavatam, the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Purana is called as a bhakti literature. Because whether you start from the first chapter or you go to the last chapter, anywhere in the middle, anywhere you touch that Purana, all that you will see is the essence, which is the bhakti, permeating all throughout. And what does this mood of bhakti explain? What does it entail into? In the understanding of this, of the absolute truth, many times you'll see certain spiritual literatures, they present the absolute truth in its ultimate glory, in its very supremely divine form, right? So the divinity of the absolute truth is overemphasized, and when the divinity is overemphasized, it will be very difficult for conditioned souls like us. Conditioned souls meaning common people like us who do not have a very deep understanding of abstract spiritual concepts. For us, it becomes very difficult to relate with these advanced spiritual topics, because divinity is something beyond us. So how can I even comprehend it, right? And on the other side, there may be certain traditions and cultures you will see in the world which present the absolute truth in a very mundane human form, right? In a sense, making them as one among us, right? They tend to oversimplify the understanding of the absolute truth. But what the bhakti understanding of the Bhagavad Puran does is, it very beautifully harmonizes the divinity, the divine and the human side of the absolute truth. In a sense, when I say human side, does not mean that the absolute truth is presented as a human being with all its limitations, but rather it is said that Gudha Kapata Manushaya, the absolute truth in his wonderful incarnations, and more specifically in his actual form as Lord Krishna, he is presenting simultaneously his divine side and his human side. And that is so beautifully described, especially in the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Remember, I told the 10th canto as a summum bonum, the main supreme shelter that is being presented, the topic of supreme shelter. Like how Krishna, through his wonderful, extraordinary pastimes, right? When the divine and the human aspects are combined, such activities are no more karma or normal activities, but they become leelas. Leelas means pastimes or just acts of play, right? Acts of play means these are non-obligatory works. Karma means it's an obligation, right? Like for example, I have to eat food because I'm hungry. If I don't eat food, my body will not be in a state of balance. Right? By eating food, by adding something external to me, I'm trying to achieve some sense of balance. That is what karma means. But Leela means that I'm already in balance and now I'm engaging in play. That I cannot do that. Conditioned souls cannot do that. But that can only be done by the absolute truth. So this beautiful understanding of Leela, the non-obligatory work, non-obligatory play, which beautifully harmonizes the divine and the human aspects. Because if you only focus on the divine side of the absolute truth, then one may question, where does the humanness in us come from? Because if we are also coming from the absolute truth, where does the humanness in us come from? It also has to have its connection in the absolute truth. So that, but then if I say the absolute truth is only human, then where is the divine side? So how do I learn to harmonize these two sides? That is the key concept that you will relish throughout the Bhagavad Puran. So beautifully, by various incarnations of the Lord, by narrating the Leelas, the pastimes of the various incarnations of the Lord, his divine side and the human-like side, let's call it that way, right? His divinity and his human-like qualities are so beautifully harmonized. And the best part is these stories not only are just presenting philosophical concepts to your head, but they also charm your heart. And in that particular state, as these leelas, they enter into your heart, they completely absorb your consciousness and it purifies your consciousness, right? Pravishta karna randhrena swana bhava saroruham sudnoti samalam Krishna salilasya yata. Like, the beautiful metaphor is given, right? That's one more beautiful thing about the Bhagavad Puran. Even among all the Vedic literatures, the Bhagavatam is considered to be one of the most poetic among all the scriptures, right? So that is, and very beautiful metaphors and analogies comparing to nature comes. So here is this analogy which talks about how sometimes the rainy season, right, the first rains, they clean up all the mud from the mountains and all the water bodies, they become muddy. But when the autumnal rains, when the second rains come, the return monsoon, when it comes, it cleans up all these muddy pools and makes them pristine blue. That is how, hearing about these stories or leelas, what do? They enter into the holes, pravishta karna randhrena, the whole of the ear, and shwana bhava saroruham, they enter into your heart. Then dhunoti, completely cleanses samalam, all the mala means all the impurities of our consciousness, all the ego that we carry. It purifies us completely and brings out the real beauty of the soul. It purifies our consciousness and makes us completely absorbed. So this is also a kind of meditation, right? This is called Lila Dhyana, or meditating upon the pastimes of the absolute truth. So that is the soul transformation that the Bhagavad Puran presents, right? So these are just a few snippets, right? There are more details. I have not gone into too many details. I just wanted to present a nice overview, kind of lay the bed so that the seeds can be planted across the subsequent weeks, right? And I encourage each and every one of you to dive deep. Like I said, it is like meditation. So with great attention and with great meditative absorption, please engage in the process of hearing of the Bhagavad Purana, and you will see what kind of wonderful transformative effects will happen to your own consciousness, to your own inner awareness, right? So thank you all very much for your very patient hearing, and I hope you all relished today's session. So at this point, we will take up some questions if you all have any. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for a wonderful introduction to the Bhagavatam. We are really grateful to you to have come on the Pavitra platform. Prabhuji, can we know a little bit about the Mahatmya of the Bhagavatam?
Yes, yes. So, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. Maybe if we can go live, yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Can
Yeah,
you please? I couldn't
yeah.
hear you.
Yes. Can you hear? Perhaps.
Yes, Prabhuji, I can hear now.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. So I was saying that maybe we could go live now.
Yes, yes,
The
Prabhuji.
screen
We are
sharing.
live.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. We are live on Prabhuji on YouTube. So,
Okay.
Prabhuji, little bit on the Mahatmya of the Bhagavatam, if you can explain us.
Yes. Sure. Yeah. So I hope you all can see me.
Yes, Prabhuji, we can see you.
Yes. Okay. Great. Yeah. So the idea was that uh, today we spoke about the background, a little technical understanding of what the Bhagavatam is. And when I was making this, I realized that I also wanted to speak about a very very famous story that is connected to the Bhagavad Purana, right? And this is the story which is talking about a very, it's called as a Bhagavad Mahatmya story. This is about a very very interesting personality. His name is Agni Deva, who was a very very pious Brahmana, a pious priest. And so he had this wife who was uh, who was not bearing a child, and he wanted to ensure that progeny takes place. So he goes, meets a great sage. Like, cutting a long story short, he actually gets a boon, a very special fruit, which is going to create his future progeny, and he asks his wife to eat it. But somehow she was slightly a trickster. She had a cheating mentality. So what ends up happening is that without eating that fruit, she ends up feeding that fruit to a cow that was there in her house, right? And meanwhile, but she had to show that she had to produce a child at some point. So she got to know that her sister was pregnant. So she somehow tricks the home, she manages the whole thing in such a way. She goes to her home and spends the next few months there. And finally she shows that, oh look, this is the child that was born of me. And she tricks her sister, also pays her some money or something, and takes that child and shows. And the child who was born that way, he was named as Dhundukari. And meanwhile, that mystical fruit which was given by a sage, which this lady was supposed to have eaten, was actually given to this cow. And this cow also, after eating that, they said that it produced a mystical kind of a child who had human like features, but the ears were like a cow. So because his ears were like a cow, his name was called as Gokarna. Karna means ears and go means cow. So one who has ears like cow. So when this happened, both the kids, they started growing up together in the same house. And Gokarna, by his nature, he was a very gentle, kind-hearted person, very focused in his studies, right? Whereas Dundukari, he was totally, a mischievous child, very very drifted apart from the moral standards. And what ends up happening is he became very corrupt at a certain point. He was constantly extorting money from his mother, and unable to bear that trauma, she actually ends up committing suicide. Now he has all the wealth, he spends all this wealth in gambling and prostitution, to a certain point where he eventually gets killed by the result of his own bad company that he had. And while all this happened, the other child, Gokarna, he went on a pilgrimage, and when he came back home, he just heard the sad news that his brother died, and he was very sad about it. But one day in the house, he notices some paranormal activity happening, and he realizes that, oh, it's the ghost. My brother, he died, and he realized, because he had an untimely death, seems like he became a ghost. Now I have to do something to benefit this particular person, the soul of my brother, right? So what to do? So he goes and asks some sages, and they say that, this particular Bhagavad Purana that we are discussing, he says you should recite this Bhagavad Purana. So then Gokarna immediately he organizes this wonderful gathering. He invites everybody in the village, and he says, now how do I invite my own brother for whom I'm doing this, right? Because he's not in a physical body, he's in an ethereal form, right? A ghost has an ethereal form. So how do I do that? So then he was told that, you need to place a rod of bamboo, and that is how your brother can also come here. So he does that, follows that, and first day he recites, a major portion of Bhagavatam. So usually it takes around 7 days for the whole thing to happen. So when he recites at the end of the first day, he notices something extraordinary, that the bamboo shoot, which usually has these knots in between, right? So the first knot of that bamboo, it burst open. And when this happened, he got convinced. Yes, seems like the Bhagavad story is working. The entire the recitation of this Bhagavad Puran is working. And second day was done, and again the second knot broke. Third, fourth, fifth, to the point where on the seventh day, the last day, all the 7 knots of that bamboo broke, and the entire bamboo stick itself it broke open. And his brother, he regained some kind of a special celestial form, and right in front of everybody's eyes, a celestial plane, a Vaikuntha Vimana, had actually a plane from the spiritual world had actually descended and was taking this his brother Dundukari back to the spiritual world. And when this was happening, Gokarna had a doubt. Hey! He was asking all the messengers from the spiritual world, Vaikuntha, says, why are you not taking us? We are also here. We also heard the story. Why are you taking only my brother? Then they give a very important reply, which I think is very important in the context of our endeavor here, this wonderful summit that you started. The Vishnu Dutas, the Vaikuntha Dutas, they say that yes, you all definitely were there in the discourse, in the discussion, in the class, but none of you were investing your awareness, your sincerity, and your consciousness. None of you are really taking shelter of these narrations as much as Dundukari was, because that person who was trapped in that ghostly body, he had no other solace than to actually listen to the Bhagavad Puran. So that was the intensity which is needed, with which he showed. So when the Vaikuntavasis, when they said that, then immediately it is said, Gokarna, he organized immediately another recitation of the Bhagavatam, and this time everybody in the audience were fully investing their consciousness in hearing without any deviation. And it said that at the end of the second round, at the second 7 days, that there was a Vaikuntha plane which came to carry everybody else. So this is a story which is popularly quoted to show what is the potency of this Bhagavad Puran, right? That it's not just humans, but any form of life, even somebody like a ghost also can be delivered by these sacred recitations, by exposure to this cosmic sound, these narrations. That is one. And two, what should be the mood of the listeners, the audience of the Bhagavad Puran? So this is a very, very famous story that comes as a Bhagavad Mahatmya. So it's very good that you reminded me of this story. So this is going to set the mood for our next few weeks of hearing this pastimes.
Yes, Prabhuji. Also, Prabhuji, what is the right way of reading the Bhagavatam? Should we go canto-wise, or we can pick up any canto and read it, or what should be the sequence of our reading?
Right. Okay. Very, very nice question. Like any book, it's always good to go in a linear sequence, right? So I will recommend to start first by just going through translations of the various cantos in a linear fashion. In fact, there are some books. If you can Google for this book, Srimad Bhagavatam Condensed by Purna Pragna Prabhu. That is a good start, right? Or today you have these books online also, where you can actually read just the translations. So I will strongly encourage you to start reading the translations to begin with, and then that will give you a nice flow. And of course, that in itself is a whole volume, just reading the translations. But that is good. It's best to always go in a sequence. Of course, having said that, why are we emphasizing on the translate? Why are we asking about going through a sequence? If you remember earlier in my presentation, I said the entire Bhagavatam is designed to be like a syllabus, a curriculum. So if you want to maximize the impact of learning, better you follow the sequence that is there in the curriculum. So the reason why these cantos are arranged in such a way is it's a very systematic evolution of thought. So I will strongly therefore encourage you to go through them in a sequence and start with translations. It's always easier that way.
Yes, Prabhuji. That's thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for coming on the Pavitra platform. We are really grateful to you, Prabhuji, and hoping to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Really grateful for this wonderful opportunity and the wonderful initiative you have taken up. So wish you all the best, the organizers and the audience as well. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you.